All right. First off, thanks to each of you for what you've done in your prior jobs and what you're doing now. There's been reports that the coronavirus may live up to 9 days on a surface. I've got to call into the CDC to get their feedback, but do you have any views on that and whether that's possible?
That's relevant in case contaminated objects prove to be a source of transmission, which would be highly unlikely and not an epidemiologic factor in most cases of respiratory virus transmission.
Beijing is really hunkering down with even greater controls in order to contain the virus because, as you had just well noted, the numbers of cases and deaths just continues to rise.
For many in Beijing, this is becoming a common sight. Disinfection stations are popping up at apartment buildings all over the city. These makeshift stations are meant to sanitize people's clothing and their shoes as they enter. Security say they spray disinfectant inside every 2 to 3 hours. Property managers are working on ways to disinfect cars, too. Until then, drivers come to places like this. Car washes now disinfect your car for free. But don't expect anyone to clean the inside of your car. The staff here are just as nervous as anyone else about catching the virus, which is why the car wash sanitizes your vehicle before you get in.
You have to distinguish between finding the virus, meaning maybe there's DNA there, dead or alive, versus the virus is alive and present in sufficient quantities to be infectious. Those are two very different things. So I personally am not focused on environmental contamination as a source of this. I think it's much more likely to be droplet and potentially aerosols, and that's kind of what we're seeing on the ship in the Japanese harbor.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else have a different view?
I mean, the data with coronavirus shows typically it's probably a couple hours where you can get transmission from what we call fomites, which is a contaminated surface, touching it and touching your face. There's been some studies that have looked at transfer of the virus under really ideal circumstances that are unlikely to exist in nature. That shows that it could be several days. I think for most purposes, we should assume that the virus has the capacity to live on a surface for a couple of hours, so you could get transfer from what we call a fomite. That's why I think one of the routes of transmission that we should be very concerned about is touching. It's not necessarily wearing face masks that's going to provide the best protection for individuals. It's going to be washing your hands and using an alcohol sanitizer appropriately.
So we import quite a few things from China: ag products, food products, processed food, seafood, grains, even live animals. Do you think we're doing all the right things with regard to reviewing what comes in and deciding what shouldn't be coming in until we get more information about how this coronavirus, the transmission of it?
I think from a regulatory standpoint, Senator, that my focus wouldn't necessarily be on the virus cross-contaminating an inanimate object and coming in, so a shipped package. I would have a very low level of concern around that as a route of transmission. I think the bigger concern right now with respect to the imports coming in from China is just the lack of oversight of manufacturing. We pulled out our own inspectors from the country. You have to believe that their regulatory apparatus is stretched right now and not providing the same level of oversight. And I think it does behoove us to think of how we're going to backstop that with other kinds of approaches like greater import sampling. It's not a perfect substitute for having inspectors on the ground, but it is a substitute. And so we need to think about how we adapt the regulatory process and take a different risk-based approach to looking at some of these products that are still coming in that consumers here in the U.S. still need.